And I said, met her. I don't even love her. Oh my god!
Why are you doing this?
I said the joke wrong. I was supposed to say, marry her. I don't even know her.
Met her? Would you say met her? I don't even love her?
Yeah.
I love her, but I've never met her. Good afternoon, Richland College. You are listening to KDUX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College in Dallas, Texas. We are the voice of Richland College. What you just heard was a song called Leaving Las Vegas by Cheryl As the Cock Crows. Sheryl Crow. Speaking of which, we are now onto the talking section. After that sweet little segue from Moore and Friends. Well, here are some more friends. The Philosophy Club.
That was good. Shout out Moore and Friends. He's
Yeah,
my
shout out
teacher.
Moore and Friends.
Moore's my teacher. He's really good. You should take him. Teaches government, 2305. He's quality.
Absolutely. I know I've heard good things of that class from
funny.
you, Chad. So what we'd like to do is make introductions before we get into everything. But before that, let me read this disclaimer here. Views expressed on the show are our own unless otherwise stated and do not reflect the opinion of KDUX Web Radio, Richland College, or the DCCCD. All right, here we are, folks. Welcome back. Another installment. I guess we should go and make introductions here real quick. Who do we got down at the far end?
My name is Keanu Reeves. You might have seen me in some great movies like The Matrix, etc., this, that. Just dropping by, take the blue pill.
Yeah, Keanu, you're
Hey, don't talk to me like that, man.
He's
Mr.
famous. He's famous.
Mr. Reeves, your
Yeah.
career's really fallen off. What happened?
Hey, man. Millions. I already got the millions. I don't need any more movies.
I bet you meant like tanning. That's really cool. You got a good tan
Yeah,
going.
thank you. I appreciate it. Got a haircut. Nice.
Yeah.
Things have changed.
Shrunk about 6 inches? Welcome. Who do we got over there? Who is that? Who's that mystery lady?
My name is Hayakazi. I'm a business major, and I actually go to the Philosophy Club and really enjoy it so far.
Thanks. Pleased to meet you.
Cliff ruining my.
Was I supposed to be in the frame? All right.
Welcome back, Cliff.
I'm Cliff. I'm just a philosophy enthusiast, and yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think we could say that about all of us. We're all philosophy enthusiasts.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. This is a good place to come and a good show to which to listen. Is that how that works grammatically?
Grammar is awesome.
That was a very violent grammatical construction. Yikes. Ouch. All right, take 7. Welcome back. This is KD. All right, guys. Today's topic, very fascinating one, I would say, violence. It was a student-suggested topic, as all of them are. And, I think we have a lot to talk about here. And there's even dimensions that were hinted at during the club meeting that we didn't get an opportunity to explore due to time constraints. So we can maybe get into those as well, along with the recap, or the requack. Now, I'll say this. This is the Philosophy Club Radio Hour, and this is, of course, an extension of the Philosophy Club. Philosophy Club meets every Tuesday from 2 to 3 p.m. in room EO76. Although, I'll say this. Over the next... we have a couple meetings this month where we're meeting in EO12. In fact, next meeting is in EO12, I believe, but typically EO76. And this is, of course, an extension thereof. Now, the topic, of course, was violence. Any salient talking points?
Well, more specifically, the topic was, is violence in our nature, or is humanity,
human nature.
Is humanity naturally violent? And there are a lot of points that we brought up. There are a lot of points that we brought up during the meeting, and I think the thing that I used to start it off was just the way that the human brain functions. People naturally create in-groups and out-groups. It's just a natural function. As a social animal, we naturally create in-groups of people who are like us and create out-groups of people who are different from us. And
The winners and the losers, as
the
our
winners and
president
the
would
losers.
say.
Or just us and them. And people see these in-groups and they say, we are virtuous, we are good people, we are nice, but they look at the out-group and say the exact opposite. They are terrible people. They lack virtue. They are savages, this, that, and everything. But that's just how the brain functions. And you can see how this type of biased mindset when looking at yourself versus other people can produce
D.
violence.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Can produce violence, and I think, look, I agree with that to a very very large extent. That, and there are existentialist thinkers who argue as much. Simone de Beauvoir, people along these lines, that argue, we inherently see people as either like us or unlike us, and so for that reason, there's always a primary sort of group and a secondary sort of group. Which is another odd way of saying that society is by its very nature hierarchical, or exclusive as well as inclusive.
I think how it works is that in human nature can be devolved into animalistic nature, and animals by nature are territorial, like you said, in groups and out groups. So it induces violence to protect your territory, to protect your kind. So when human beings evolve, that's taken a lot more nuanced terms, I'd say, to how violence works in society now.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And this is something a road we could go down, is the ways in which human beings show violence as opposed to any other animal showing violence. And this is something, again, we touched upon, but didn't quite get into what constitutes violence. And I think Brett's from our sociology department here, who attends our meetings, great guy. He was pushing this. He said, can we get a precise definition of violence? But that becomes difficult when you consider that violence is not necessarily strictly a physical coercion kind of thing. That violence could take on more mature, more refined forms that befit a rational, mature kind of animal, kind of creature.
Yes.
But then that becomes tricky because, does violence become subjective in the way that being offended becomes objective? Are words truly as violent as fists? Things along these lines. If somebody says something violent towards me and I don't care about what that person thinks anyway, have they really inflicted any violence on me?
And yes, basically, because some words can be used to predict or predict or prophesize violence.
Okay, that's fair.
When we use it to, it is of course it is a crime to use violence to for a political cause. That's why if you want to, that's just as much as you want to regulate other people. If you want them to submit, then one way that humans have been known to do it is through violence. Is absolutely violence. Is because it's not always, it doesn't always take in the form of physical violence. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. But also I like what you said too, that it could certainly be an indicator.
A precursor to actual violence.
Yeah, especially if the words are threats of violence, for sure. Yeah, I think that's very true.
It's basically a violation to use your words to unduly influence another person's life. That's what it is.
We can call it a violenceation.
Yeah.
Terrible.
A violation of violence, a violenceation of a violent nation.
I deem that a terrible joke.
I take my laugh back.
Hey, no takebacks. We have you on tape.
Possible.
No tape backs. Okay, so I think these are great talking points, and we should explore them. But first, guys, how's your Halloween?
My Halloween sucked. I'm kidding.
Really?
I just went into offices and stole candy.
Oh, the phones are lighting up. I think it's Kelly over at
The police
City
are at
Life.
the door.
No, Kelly knows me. Louise will get angry because I took more than 5 chocolates from the box.
The
Are you
FBI are
listening,
knocking at the
FBI?
door.
Are you getting this, officer?
Yeah, right? Jeez. Good to know. That's very suggestive. That suggests
At
violence.
least I'm honest. Okay?
I have a wire. You're under arrest.
Look, I'm the
How
one
could you
holding the
turn on
gavel,
us?
and I'm the one holding the gavel, so not guilty.
Okay, cool. Resolved.
It's terrible.
Radio show adjourned.
Yeah. Halloween was cool. I just sat home, got intoxicated.
Nice.
There you go. Wow.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah.
How was your Halloween, Manzi?
Ah, it's nice of you to ask. I've asked so many people how their Halloweens have gone, and nobody has returned it. So thank you. My Halloween was pretty uneventful. I gave out candy.
Oh.
I wore a costume. I dressed up. I'm very festive.
As what?
As what?
I'm actually ashamed to say this right now. I dressed up as Keanu Reeves.
Did you
No, I'm
really?
joking. I'm joking.
Really?
No,
Come on.
I dressed up as a baseball player. I went as a Yankee.
Wow.
You're a
Oh,
Yankee
that's
baseball player.
embarrassing.
I quit.
Well, it's embarrassing because the
I'm never
Yankees
coming
lost
back
in
here.
spectacular
Oh
fashion.
yeah, I guess that's true.
In the pennant. But yeah, it was good. What I was doing, I was writing letters of rec for students last night.
That's nice.
While giving out candy and just looking. Man, it's so interesting to see students, or not students, see students. It's so interesting to see children and teens actually, who kind of will come by looking for candy, and the effort to costume yourself up is very interesting. Because I think that the younger they are, it seems like the more effort they put into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to dress up, but I don't care to. But like my favorite horror movie character is Candyman with the hook
I've never seen
and the
that movie.
bees.
Oh, that's a freaky movie.
With Sweeney Todd. He's
Yeah.
awesome.
Sweet.
He's awesome.
Sweet.
Mine is I think Chucky the puppet.
Yeah.
That's just creepy.
That's
That developed my fear of puppets and dolls.
That's I grew up with Chucky. Did you ever see Bride of Chucky?
Yeah.
Yes,
What's
my
the-
favorite.
That's your favorite?
Well, I mean, the best one of them. That's
best.
what the.
It's kind of weird how I watched all of Chucky's works, even the Indian version, and it's just scary.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'll just say this: the Bride of Chucky. I think it gets so silly because it's him copulating with another
Yeah, that's pretty
puppet,
weird.
and it's so bizarre. It's
I
such a
heard
weird
that
thing to
that
show.
happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I think it's silly. I think it's. Jesus.
Yeah, that scene was a particularly interesting
That was the
one.
best scene of the movie.
Scene of any movie.
And then they went back to killing.
They
Okay.
went back to killing. Exactly. Exactly, and they went back to killing. Clearly, I don't know how to work the levels on this thing.
It's all good.
So, what would be my favorite Halloween character? That's a tough question. I think it would be. Oh gosh, I don't know. I guess maybe Jason's mother from the original Jason from the original Halloween.
Really?
You ever see the original Halloween?
Yeah, she's cool.
Or no, is it Jason?
No, I know.
Mike
Yeah,
Myers?
Jason Voorhees.
Jason Voorhees.
He drowned, and Fred.
Spoiler! Oh my God,
I
that
know.
movie just came out. Like, I'm kidding.
In 1982.
Yeah.
Yeah, his mother was like totally warping his son's mind, her son's mind. So
Yes. In the original Halloween, there is no Jason Voorhees, only by association. It's the mother.
oh yeah.
So you see flashbacks of him, but yeah, it's at any rate. How can we connect this? Oh yeah, most Halloween movies are violent. There you go. That was the connection I wanted to make.
Nice.
And so, well, this brings us to an interesting topic: violence in terms of how it's received, how it's interpreted. And I know this came up.
Yeah, it did.
Let's move to the requack.
No, please.
I know this came up. This idea of violence in the media, especially for entertainment
Yeah,
purposes.
entertainment.
The kind of impact it might have, and what's a more real version of violence? Bloody, gory violence depicted in a fictional movie, or real people saying really harsh words to you? Is there a more genuine version of violence, or are they just simply equal but different?
I don't know if you could really call someone saying harsh words violence.
Why not?
I don't think. Well, you said in the fact that if someone says harsh words, then violence would be subjective, because something that's harsh to, if I say, hey man, you're stupid, I could say that to 5 different people and they take it 5 different ways. But if I go and punch 5 different people, they're all gonna feel the same exact pain. Violence.
No, that's good. That's a good point.
Because the actual definition of violence is bodily harming
Mhm.
someone, right? But
Okay, yeah. So all other versions of violence, therefore, are kind of figurative.
Yeah.
They're poetic, metaphorical. They're not necessarily literal.
Mhm.
Okay, that's true. But then again, what you think about it? Sometimes oh, that's my catchphrase. Think about it, which is not to say that you haven't already. But here's what I'm thinking. Sometimes physical violence is considered to be something to promote. So if you think of like training for a boxing match or something like that, or it's like when your father tells you, "Yeah, stand up to the bully," and
It's
you're like,
glorious.
"Yeah, but Daddy's gonna beat me up," and your father's kind of like, "Well, yeah, you're gonna learn something either way from the fight." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
You know
would do
what's
that to my
funny?
kid.
You know, it's funny.
I'd be the bully. I'm kidding. That's
I grew up in like Saudi Arabia, and my family is very passive.
Dad, is that you? No.
I grew up in Saudi Arabia, but my family is really passive in terms of violence. We don't like it at all. So when I was like, I think 12 years old, out in the fields in Saudi Arabia, surprisingly there was grass, right? And I had this place I called the albatross nest. I remember these kids came up to me, and they
I'm
were
sorry,
like 8 years old.
The albatross nest?
Yeah, because it was just a lot of grass. I
That's
just called it
nice.
albatross nest because it was
You don't
cute.
gotta explain yourself.
Right,
Go
he's
ahead.
asking.
It doesn't matter the kind of grass, but
Anyways, so these kids came up to me, like 8 years old, and they came up to me and started beating me up. And I was like,
what?
That's, how do you just jump over?
I don't know.
someone
They just did. Okay, so I went. I was like, okay, you know what? I'll be a big person, and I went and complained to their parents. Right?
I'm going to be a big person in Tattletale.
Yeah, and shush, okay. I came back, I sat down, saw that the albatross nest was destroyed. I was
Aw.
like, okay. I cried a ton, and they came
I'm
back
sorry.
with more kids.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, went home with a broken arm. It wasn't funny.
What
For
in
real?
the world?
Yeah.
Those kids broke your arm? Damn.
Yeah, they did. I
Jesus
didn't.
Christ.
How old were the kids?
8
How
to
old
10.
were you?
12.
Why'd they do this?
They were younger than you?
Yeah, they were younger than me. But it was funny 'cause at that time.
Like, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it was funny because
Great-
I still
great
don't know what
comedy story.
incited that
Like,
violence.
Mom, look what happened to me. And her arms like dangling.
No, you want to hear a good one?
Yeah.
Take me to the hospital.
Please.
What?
It was a fracture, but yeah.
Okay.
Jeez Louise.
It was so funny, but 'cause
That was not funny.
it was funny because I still don't know what incited that violence. I still don't know. And they had a nanny who stood there and watched it all.
Jeez Louise.
A nanny who stood there and watched and placed bets and took bets. And
Yeah, it was funny because at that time I couldn't figure out what could have incited violence in such small kids.
Uh-huh.
Because I grew up in this environment that even if you're getting beat up, you should not raise your hand against someone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the mentality my parents taught me. But
Mhm.
what about these kids? It wasn't just one singular kid from one singular parent. It was a group of kids.
Agree with kids.
Yeah, it's very easy to because
Beat up a 10-year-old.
Yeah, to just by exposing them to all the imagery they get. That's
But do you even think that? Because the kids, they were young kids, and I don't know if they were raised in an environment where fighting people was normal or anything. But you said that you were raised and you were taught not to be violent. But the fact that someone has to be taught not to be violent, does that
Interesting.
tell something about human nature that we're taught out of this stuff? And someone, his name's Jake, he talked about in the last meeting how over the years humanity we were born animals, or when we were cavemen we were basically savages, but over the years we were tamed and now we have been civilized animals. But in the fact that we're tamed, it shows that we're not natural. Something that's tamed is not natural. It's domesticated. It's been changed from its natural state. So could we use this information to imply that our natural state is more violent or is more savage?
yeah. It would be interesting to find out whether humans are born with any violent tendencies,
I'd
right?
say they're aggressive by nature, because like most predators are, right? They're aggressive by nature just because they want to protect their territory.
Yeah.
So at one point when you grow up, and humans are actually really intelligent. They have more emotions. They have more like sentience than other animals. So at one point, these aggressiveness doesn't have any meaning. You're not being territorial. Sometimes, like you said in the Philosophy Club, it's to fulfill a bodily desire. When baby cries or throws a tantrum because it wants food. But sometimes when you grow up, it really doesn't have a meaning. You're just getting out all that emotion.
You just kept purging yourself emotionally.
Yeah, I feel like rage is the strongest, because I remember maybe it was a study or it was a movie. I can't really recall. It was about a person who had this disorder, a syndrome which blocked all their emotions. Right, and the most prominent one, the only one they could actually feel, was anger. None of the other emotions were prominent. So I kind of feel like anger and aggressiveness it's not that it's what makes us human. It's just the most prominent emotion in the human body, and aggressiveness does essentially lead to violence.
Emotion in the human body. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. So it seems like anger is immediate. Well, a lot of emotions sometimes you can call immediate insofar as you feel them as soon as you're experiencing them, as you witness something, unless it's traumatizing and you're kind of paralyzed momentarily. And so anger seems to be the most immediate feeling. People can kind of flip a switch sometimes and go from 0 to 10. And usually if they increase, if they lose their temperature, if they lose their temper in that way, the temperature is dropping, folks. But we're keeping it hot in here with these discussions.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah.
So, we're about to take
It was
flight.
bad.
And all of this is, of course, with the parameter that sometimes, violence is a means to an end. Because if you gotta fight somebody to steal something from them, then kids will easily pick up on that pattern of behavior. Yeah.
I saw that firsthand last night when I went
For
around
real?
and beat up kids for the candy.
Nice.
Take
Dressed
it
as a
candy
baseball
from a
player.
baby.
As a piece, that's why I had the bat. So yeah, let's. I think that's right. And so focusing on anger for a second here. Now, Uche, you put it. I believe it was you. Excuse me, Keanu.
Yeah. Come on, dude. Come on.
We were talking about how anger or something like violence is impulsive. And as you say, that impulse is something we have to tame. We have to make domesticated. So we seem to be born, maybe not born with a proclivity towards violence. We can't say that maybe yet, but at the very least, we're born with a proclivity towards being impulsive. And whenever the impulse is,
That's what Christopher was saying.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's what Chris was saying. We're inclined to do just that, to indulge the impulse before thinking about it, and it's by learning to reflect upon our impulses, our feelings, that we come to quote unquote domesticate ourselves. But what of the times when violence is necessary? Now again, we talked about violence earlier in terms of entertainment value and the violence that you were a victim of, that's as you kind of alluded to, that's sort of like kids. So I'm not so sure that a 10-year-old has a deep wealth of meaning and a profound understanding of what it is to hurt something else. I think a 10-year-old is frustrated and hungry and sees somebody playing in their albatross nest.
Okay, it was my imagination. I used to think a lot.
That's nice.
No, that's beautiful. I like that. I think that's wonderful.
You could write a book about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely not the kind of thing that would get a dork beaten up. I think I'm just joking.
Come on, man.
Jeez Louise.
No, I think highly of you. I think, but I think Cliff is onto something here. What about those times when violence seems like the only rational thing to do? How is it something that? Do you have to unlearn what you learned in terms of domesticating yourself? Do you have to forget what you were taught and try to return to this innate nature of spontaneity, of impulsiveness, which is often, I think y'all are right, typically shown in fits of rage or anger that result in violence?
Okay. No. You
I
can
also
just.
have something to say, but you can go.
No. You can just. Violence is when it's time to do violence. Is when somebody decides to do violence. It's
a deliberation.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's you can just as easily change your mind about it in the middle of the act. So that.
How would that happen though? Like mid punch?
Or maybe you just
Yeah.
look at what you're doing. You see the blood on your hands. You look at what you're doing. You're like, what
Yeah.
the hell am I doing?
Hey
right now?
guys, do you not?
Happened to me yesterday, huh?
Yeah. How
I
are
just
you
beat up
guys?
some kids.
Yeah. Are you guys familiar with the movie The Kingsman?
I haven't seen it.
It's where
That's
this.
just violence. Just honestly violence.
Yeah, yeah. It's where the Samuel L. Jackson plays the bad guy, and he uses free. He gives everybody free phones and the
A
whole
chip that you
world.
can plant in your head.
Yeah, implants in your heads
Did we
and
talk
whatnot.
about that last semester?
Yeah, it's like where you can the bad guy sends a signal to everybody and makes them go ape. Nonsense.
I understand. Wow.
Yeah, it's where they it's where the idea is that you can send a sound signal to people's brains and make them go berserk.
Oh.
We won't tell you the ending of the movie because it's just it's awesome in a violent manner and,
wow.
Yeah.
and almost artistic. But regardless, I feel like what Clinton was talking about, violence comes from when you can decide to stop, right? But at one point, human beings have more control over their emotions, right? They're more control. So human beings can decide to stop being violent at a moment when violence becomes the only option. But what about the times when you can't control your emotions, when it's a physical problem that you cannot, mental problem that you cannot control your emotions because you don't have those inhibitors in your brain. So at that moment, violence takes like a almost primitive form, and you become this crazy person that you see in jackets and asylums.
Shout out to last week's topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
And yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I think that's a very intelligent way to look at it. I just wonder though that sometimes in the heat of the moment, violence feels right, even if you know it's wrong.
Yeah.
What do we make of that?
I think that you could say that in the human mind, there's the animalistic side of us, and then there's the conscious side of us.
Yeah.
It kind of can be like there's the impulsive side of our minds, and then there's the conscious side of our minds. And when we are stricken by some stimuli that is so disgusting, so offensive.
Stricken by some stimuli.
Nice, yeah, I loved it. if we're stricken by some stimuli that is so offensive or so disgusting that sometimes the impulsive side of us can like almost take our consciousness as a wave, and we act based off the impulses, act based off the emotions that are coming out of it. Like if you walk in on someone like slapping your mom, you're not gonna.
Sorry about that, Uche.
Yeah, I remember that, man. Come on, dude. Come on. But
Keanu's
like,
mother.
You'll be just taken by the emotions. Your consciousness will be kind of surfing the wave of your emotions. You will be taken along with it. And it's something, the emotional impact is so strong that it just takes you with it and you're along for the ride. But you could be going along for the ride willingly, and it would probably be very hard to stop going along with the ride. But
Yeah.
it's kind of like that constant battle between impulsivity and your civilized conscious mind.
Yeah. No, I think there's something to. But here's what's so interesting. Then it sounds like, and I think this is the position you articulated yesterday. It sounds like what you're saying is that what's natural then is violence,
I think so.
and because that's why it's impulsive. And then what we have to do is develop habits to check our otherwise violent tendencies, and that's what we call civil obedience. That's
Or
what we.
being raised.
Yeah, being raised in such a way where you learn to master your impulses rather than they master you. Because this is the other thing that we didn't really get around to talking about was just because it's natural doesn't make it the best thing to do for you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's natural to have impulses and feelings and to act on them, if that brings about destruction and anarchy and chaos, maybe you're better off adopting a second nature.
And I think that's the
a
reason.
new habit.
I think the reason that's being thrown away, that impulsive behavior that's being thrown away, is because people want to live in a community where they can feel safe, they can feel as if they have their property protected, and over time laws were established to ensure these things, ensure that each person is protected, each person is treated fairly, each person is treated this way and that way. But something that I wanted to talk about, or I want to talk about now, and that I talked about a little bit yesterday, was you kind of mentioned that people have a threshold of violence.
Oh, yeah.
That people have a peak of violence, that they won't go over this violence. And something that was said a lot yesterday during the meetings is that people used to be barbaric, or people used to be very violent. But I think that potentially people have just handed over their violence onto someone else, and they call that a military. Instead of me doing the dirty work, I give it to the military so they can fight the war for me. I'm not violent anymore, so people can feel comfortable with themselves saying that I'm a civilized person, but I have this army of millions of people who are willing to do the dirty work for me. They're going to get their hands dirty, but I'm a civilized person, so I can't do that.
I think I see where you're going, because I think last club meeting we talked about how it was hard for people to turn on the pain meter during the experiment when it seemed like it was physically harming someone, but in actuality it wasn't actually harming them. It's that emotion as that we don't want to take part in any violence essentially, but we don't mind if someone else is doing it. It's like the logic of hiring an assassin. You don't want to kill the person yourself, so you just tell somebody else to do the dirty work.
Yes, in Vietnam, I saw this story about a former Marine and a guy from the Viet Cong. They both met up like 50 years later. And what they made known was that the Vietnamese, they look at the war they see as they do see the war that happened there as an American aggression, but they make the distinction that people are not violent or just plain old evil. They see as governments doing terrible things, making terrible decisions. That that's how they made peace with Americans.
That's fascinating. I did not. I haven't heard of that interview, but I'd like to read that story. You guys are getting an interesting point here, both with that anecdote as well as what y'all are saying in general. You're linking, it seems, impulse and with violence, and also aggression with violence. But I wonder if you could be violent without being aggressive, or is aggression a necessary ingredient? And I only say it for the following reason: referring to sort of violent acts as doing the dirty work. And so you could, because I totally hear where you're coming from, this idea of it's easy to be pro-violent when you don't have to be violent. It's easy to sit back and say, no, we need to defend ourselves. It's a different story when you're actually there. However, I wonder if, and again, you can. I obviously have no military background whatsoever, but I wonder if they train you to be aggressive, if they try to cultivate this aggression that you have in you.
No,
because that would seem to be run contrary to something like being able to rationally obey a commanding officer. It seems like it would teach you discipline with regards to your impulses.
Yeah,
and so I think it's interesting that you train people to be violent, but that requires them to somehow be domesticated.
Yeah.
I think they might, because I think the military boot camp type thing, I think that their number one thing would be forget your old self, forget who you were, you're a soldier now, or you lose yourself and you become desensitized to it. And it might be because they were raised in a society where they were taught that violence is bad, or they're raised in a society where they're taught that all people are treated equal, you shouldn't hurt your brother, you shouldn't be mean to your brother or anything. And now they have to come and they have to do the exact opposite of what they were taught. So now the military, the sergeant leader is going to have to take them and strip all of that away from them. And then they go off to war as a soldier who is detached from them that they were the person that they were raised to be.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay,
like in because like they train they discipline the hell out of you just to prevent. They train you not to pull the trigger. Like they train you to make so many checks, like a whole mental checklist before you take the safety off your weapon. It's just they do, however, train you to be a killer. It's like that. Remember that movie Jarhead? It's like that guy had an emotional breakdown because because that officer walked in and took his kill by with an airstrike, like because he's a sniper, and then the officer just walks in like, "Hey guys, sit back and watch this." Like, no, I want to do this. Like, I want to make. Oh, this is my kill. I waited so long for this. Like, he just it's. We can be bred into transformed into killers.
Yeah, and I think what that is here, that transformation is sort of, it's heightening, it's refining or elevating an otherwise violent act as killing somebody into almost an art form, where it becomes very rational. There's strategy involved. There's a technique involved. Things along these lines, and as a result, you get acts of violence, intentional acts of violence that aren't necessarily violence.
Can I mention an example of something?
No, thanks.
Okay.
No, please do.
I did research on Spartan history, and I really enjoy it. So far, it's one of my favorite kingdoms or cultures that I really, really find that has affected our world a lot, especially military. Because right now, British and American military is still based upon Spartan military, and it's funny.
It's a part of Sparta.
Yeah, it's funny because Spartan culture was the military. It literally was the military. Kids would, especially boys, they would be taken from their parents at 7 years old, and if they were weak, at least deemed weak by the elders, they would be thrown into forests so they could fend for themselves and find their way back to the city.
You say that's great, Uchi?
It was scary, and it's funny because normally at that time Roman culture was were reaching like high levels of philosophy, and there was Plato and all these people who were mentally reaching barriers of human nature, and they were solving these problems. But Spartan culture hated that. They believed that we did not need anything art in our culture. We don't need anything. We don't need music. We don't need art. We don't need philosophers. We just need to fight for our place. And it's not like they encourage violence. It's not like they told her, okay, you will go to the field and you will kill all these people. No, they actually encourage deception. Surprisingly,
Oh, wow.
you can't imagine Spartans to encourage deception, but they do. They actually encouraged their militants to, maybe if they wanted food, to steal it. We'll encourage you to steal it and not get caught. And it's kind of funny because Spartans in the end did die a very violent death, and in their entire history just trickled off into the unknown. But they incited this culture of violence when essentially it was still based on deception.
Yeah, it was a human kind of violence, not an animal kind of violence. And I think that distinction is an important one for the reasons you just said. It's humans using reason and deciding how to channel our violence and to make it into something like an art form where you know how to be violent well and at the right times and towards the right people. And so, outbursts of violence they'll become inappropriate where, your dog paws on you because he has to go outside and you scream at him, something like that.
Don't scream at your dogs, please.
Did I say dogs? I meant students. No, that's... Oh, yeah, shoot. You know what, guys? We didn't have the volume on this whole time. Can we start from the beginning?
Sure.
All right,
kidding.
cool.
Are you serious?
You are listening to K-Ducks Web Radio.
Please don't.
I'm joking. I think...
My heart just went like, whoa.
No, if that ever happened, believe me, it'd be the last time we ever recorded this. I think what you're getting at then, as an example, drawing upon the Spartans, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a good historical case, is this idea that violence can be something that isn't necessarily for the sake of evil, and it isn't necessarily at odds against more rational civil impulses. You can use your civility, your reason, your rationality to channel violent natures towards their justified, I guess, opponents, enemies, towards justifiable reasons. So there's a time and place to get mad. There's a time and place to get angry. And then maybe there's a time and place to become violent.
See, I think it's really important to define it like that, because you can't call another animal, for lion killing a deer as violence, because it is a part of nature.
Well, it is violence.
Yeah, it is violence.
It's justified violence because of the circle of life and whatnot.
Yeah.
I guess so, but
it's not immoral violence.
yeah, it's not immoral violence.
It's natural violence.
I remember reading a book. I'm not sure if everybody's read it. It's called the BFG.
Oh my!
It's my favorite. It's my favorite book.
They're making a movie about that starring Keanu Reeves.
They made a movie, but it was crap. Anyways, what I liked,
Shout out movie.
BFG.
Yeah, the big friendly giant. But
Okay.
what I liked about it is this big friendly giant talks about how human beings. Huh?
Is he a robot?
You mean the Jolly Green
He's
Giant?
a giant.
Okay, never mind.
The one on the
So-
peas
Go
can?
ahead.
So what he does is he talks about how human beings they kill each other for no reason. Unlike animals, they don't kill each other for no reason. Right. It's at that time as a kid, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so right. All human beings are pigs, and we should all just die.
Yeah. Well, who is that
No
represent?
wonder those.
Welcome to the club. Nice to have another like-minded member on board. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Have y'all ever heard this story about the owner of Jersey Mike's, or Donald Trump Jr.?
Tell the story.
Yeah, tell us about Jersey Mike's.
No,
I love that place.
No, all there is to know is that both of these people, Donald Trump Jr. and the owner of Jersey Mike's, they both enjoy shooting endangered animals, like traveling to Africa and shooting endangered animals.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
So why?
That's why the steak and cheese is so good.
Yeah. What? Nah.
No, please,
That
no,
was a
please,
joke.
no.
Why do people like these think they feel so compelled to go somewhere and kill something that may never be around anymore? It
Could make them feel superior.
Yeah,
makes them feel superior.
That's an astounding notion to me.
It really is mind-boggling to think people can be so bad.
Is it bad? I mean, if they don't value animals, then of course that's why they're going to act that way.
Yeah, and that's one problem. Is that we need to teach our children is more ethics, more ethics, and more value for for the planet, environment, and all that.
Yeah,
and
life
for,
in general.
Yes, for life, for the diversity of life in general, is to be instilled within the children. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and otherwise, if you have these moral questions, you're walking around. It's a real albatross.
What is this albatross? Okay.
I think that's a bird, but
it's a giant bird.
It's one of the biggest birds in the world.
Okay.
So at that time,
it's from Neverending Story. That kid rides an albatross, right?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I had this weird habit of reading encyclopedias. So yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah, I was. At one time, I was dyslexic, so I started reading encyclopedias to get a hold of it. And I read this book about birds, and I saw that albatross was the biggest, and I'm like, you know what? This is my favorite bird.
That's nice.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
So you could write a book about yourself. But something you should, yeah. But something that I wanted to touch on is Haya earlier mentioned there's definitely a difference between a person going out and killing somebody between and a lion going out and killing a prey or a piece of prey or a prey basically. The difference is
it's pronounced prayer.
The difference is I think the difference comes from the fact that lions do not have a higher form of consciousness. They don't have morals. They are just survival-based creatures. And because people have reached a level of thinking that's higher than just survival-based, when someone acts so savagely or someone acts so animalistically, it's deemed immoral. It's deemed strange. And I think that's because we have a tendency of differentiating humans from animals, so we hold ourselves to a higher standard. And when we act like animals, we see that as a negative thing.
Exactly. I think you nailed the generally Western conception of it. I think that's true. I think that anything that makes us resemble the animals is something people might consider uncouth.
You eat like a pig.
But something I really want to talk about is perspective as well.
So like my girlfriend.
But something I really want to talk about is perspective as well. And one of the most violent person I know right now in history, except for Hitler, is Genghis Khan. And not a lot of people do know about him. And he was the most violent person before the industrial age that could have killed millions of people. He wasn't just violent in a way that he harmed human beings. He destroyed their lives. He would go into the places he conquered and sow salt into the land. And if you don't know, by sowing salt, you're ruining the land, right? And this in countries like India, Afghanistan, and more of the maybe Middle East to India and all the way to the east side, everybody considered him to be extremely, extremely violent, and he was terrible. But I recently met a friend who was from China, and she told me that Genghis Khan was considered a hero in her country because he was the biggest. He was the most, he was the biggest conqueror of China, and I was amazed for someone who grew up learning how terrible Genghis Khan was. I couldn't understand that. How could you consider a man who would cut off the legs of his many wives just so they wouldn't run away? And that's just a Disney version of what he used to do. Yeah. That really was a Disney version of what he used to do, and I couldn't imagine somebody would consider him a hero.
I think that might touch on the in groups and out groups that I mentioned earlier. How the person was from China, and I guess that. I don't know where Genghis Khan was from, but I guess that...
He was from the Mongol area?
Yeah, I'd say Mongolia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe because that is geographically near China, that they consider that their group, that's their people. He's one of their historical figures, and they were on the winning team, so they would call him a hero, a historical leader, a great guy. And then you look at yourself, your separate team, or a different group of people.
The losers.
Yeah, the losing team, I guess. And you can see how that turns it into a terrible act, but you can see how people justify or people glorify the people on their sides when they do terrible things just because they are winning, but on the other side, it's the exact opposite.
But it's also really important to know what exactly he's done as the losers, because history is written by the victors, and that's what we've been taught in every history class so far. but when the victors themselves don't know what they did to
Yeah.
win, right? And I mean, I can imagine these people from China, they don't exactly know how bad Genghis Khan was. They do know that he conquered all these lands, and by what means they're not sure of. Sure, by violent means, but how violent they didn't know. But these losers, we know what we went through. We know what the people went through. So we know how violent and how terrible he was. But it's also the matter of realizing that how terrible a person is, how violent a person is, and realizing in society he does not have a place anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it really begs the question that violence is something that is assigned by society. So at one point, if violence is accepted in society, then it's no longer violence. It's not considered violence.
Yeah.
Violence has a
It's
negative
normalized.
intonation to it.
Or what's more, it has a positive connotation. I mean, look, one of the reasons why I think Genghis Khan is considered so legendary, well, first of all, he didn't just sow salt. I think there's something like, and this is a legitimate statistic, it's something like 15% of the human population is somehow
Yeah.
related to Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
But the point being is this, that he seemed godlike. He commanded so much fear and so much respect because he could be so violent that he was like a god. But isn't there something interesting about that? And I think this is related to your point that in order to be considered godlike, you have to act like a savage animal.
No, but I guess what you're saying is to be godlike to be inhuman.
Good. Yeah.
But
Right.
like
Yeah.
it's not just godlike. It's also anti-godlike in a sense. Because I remember in this thing I read that there was an ancient saying called "as above, so below." So man mirrors God, right, and the earth mirrors the heavens. So when you take someone who's not human, like Genghis Khan, because every book, every comic, every movie I've so far watched of him is him being just not human. Something about him was just not human, and that's why just comes to it that he wasn't just godlike. He was the devil. He was considered the devil even by his own people.
He was supernatural.
He's just supernatural because you cannot imagine a person being so cruel.
But listen, what
Okay.
happens? He becomes a hero. And so to build on your point there, this idea that, depending on the perspective, violence is either celebrated or ridiculed. And what's more, something that can't be denied is that when you inflict violence on something or somebody, it has a direct, immediate impact, and you feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the change. What's so scary is that, well, okay, I should say this. It seems like that's how it was even initially in the West as well as the East, where you think of like Homer's Iliad in the Trojan War. All your major heroes seem to be heroes that are really great at kicking butt on the battlefield. And that's what makes them a hero. That your physical prowess equals your virtue. And it was through the course of history in the Western world, and maybe even beginning with Homer, through these stories, the idea of what is to be considered laudable, what is to be considered virtuous or heroic, it changes. It goes from physical violence and physical force to something more like reason or rational politics. Let's settle these things with our intellects, stuff along these lines. And so I think there's an actual conscious effort to, as we discussed before, remove ourselves from any sort of animal likeness. And yet, I mean, what do we say nowadays if somebody's really awesome? That guy's a beast. Wow, he has the heart of a lion. That's savage. He's ferocious like a tiger.
He's a savage.
Yeah, he's just a
He's a
savage.
savage.
Yeah,
She's a savage.
and that has a positive connotation. So it's tough. It's tough for me to really believe that violence is in some way, shape, or form celebrated by every society.
It's a positive connotation because we elevate beasts, or so they're called, right? Let's remember that being a beast like being a terrifying beast like Hitler or Mussolini or Genghis Khan or just like I think it's imperative that every whenever it's noted that people saw any of these terrible people as gods or something similar is you of course will fall short because these were people that God's is used in the sense that they have power over you.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not necessarily that they have any supernatural abilities. Like,
True.
It was said that remember that Lisa Ling went to North Korea, and she had a story told to her that Kim Jong-un had shot 3 arrows like Robin Hood, like one on top of 3 arrows on top of each other. Like, of course not, but he's not.
How do you know?
People will tell these absurdities about a historical figure, no matter how peaceful or warlike they were.
To add to the myth, Cliff, it's funny you say that. We've got a special guest in studio today, Kim Jong. Come on out. He's got his bow and arrow.
Sure.
Cliff, he's coming after you, dude.
Uche, can you stand by that wall?
We're gonna box.
Let me just put an apple on my.
And look, if you even want to talk about stuff like weapons, look, I mean, now we've developed weapons in such a way to help us be more stealthily violent.
It's pretty crazy. People were saying that we've become less violent, but we could even say that we've become better at violence.
Yeah,
we've improved our violence.
More violent, or more humane, less violent.
We've evolved out of violence, but maybe the violence has evolved with us to the point where it looks like we're not even doing it anymore.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And then juxtapose that with the whole PC culture, where suddenly everything is considered violent, everything is considered offensive, everything is considered an attack. It's an odd. I mean, dare we say paradox? Something along those lines.
I think how in turn in society right now, violence is considered very, very bad. So it's taken a lot more shadowy terms to it. You can't tell people that you're violent. That's why things like domestic violence and all these are done under a veil. We know it's happening, but it's still considered bad. So people hide it. They hide the fact that it's happening, and that's why violence has taken an eviler turn. And right now, with the amount of information that's passing, any sort of violence towards a human being is not celebrated anymore. At least it's not considered, unless you live in a country like North Korea, where it's being like it's separated from the other world. So something their leaders might do that is violent might be considered celebratory in that country, but not anywhere else in the world. Not anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is why ultimately MMA just needs to go away.
Yes.
Anyways.
But
we all know it's fake.
I don't. Whatever. Come on. Terrible. Those kids did MMA on you. I'm kidding. But I'm sorry. But I think that people can be violent, and people could be even surprised by how violent they are everywhere in the world. Like. Yeah. There's even watching street fights. People gather around street fights and just watch them.
Somebody stop
it. They don't break them up. They legit scream "World Star." They just watch these things happening. Why
can't they all just break down into dance off, man? Why violence, man?
Well, well, that's just one of those. It usually World Star usually starts in some other when some agreement breaks down, right? Well, just something similar like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think that maybe the reason, I talked about this yesterday also, I think that maybe the reason that violence or anger is an immediate emotion is because back when we were cavemen or savages and we would be chased by predators or we would be going after prey, anger or violence or angry determination would be the most immediate response, or it'd be the most efficient response of running away from the prey, fighting the prey, or fighting the predator. It would be the most sensible emotion to feel at the time. You're not going to feel happy if there's a predator coming after you. You're not going to feel.
Point. Yeah, it is reasonable.
It's the most sensible emotion to be feeling right at that time, and maybe that's the reason that it's such a split. It's like it's second nature, or maybe it's first nature.
Yeah.
For us, and that it just comes naturally to us. Maybe it's because it's been instilled into us from our survival mentality or survival eras.
The reptilian brain.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And also just tying it back to that previous point. I mean, human beings are really great at being violent in a passive way. We have a term for it. Passive aggression.
Oh yeah.
People they turn it into an art, especially some people down south here.
Yeah.
But did somebody say savage? Oh yeah, the macho man.
That was
Randy
so
Savage.
WWE's fake.
I think
Conor McGregor would beat everyone in the
Oh, you better watch your tone there, brother, because when the Macho Man gets upset, yeah, he gets savage. Yeah. Okay.
that's kind of creepy.
That was
I love it.
That wasn't bad, right?
It was good. It was
All right, guys, we got to wrap up.
I think really we should talk about what the words like savage or beast actually means. That it doesn't essentially mean violence itself. It means kind of like anarchy or acting against the rules or randomly.
animalistic.
Yeah.
Not just violence, but animalistic. And you can't. Sometimes it's not explainable. It's saying. Being savage towards a person, for example, she's savage. Oh, she burned him, right? She's saying the things that are the truth, right? She's going against the rule and being rude to the person.
She's not being subtle.
She's not being subtle, and she's being blunt like an animal. And it doesn't incite violence itself. It just incites
Directness.
a directness, an animalistic behavior.
Yeah. It's I think there's something to that in candor, but sometimes the truth could feel like it hurts. The truth hurts. It could be violent.
But then again, we've already discussed that words are not violence itself.
Well, we can return to that. I do think we should. That could be an interesting topic. But savage, you're right. It doesn't just mean killing somebody. It means massacring in a way that's distasteful. Yeah, like snapping, like the Macho Man snaps into a Slim Jim. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna get going. The Philosophy Club meets every Tuesday from 2 to 3, and typically EO76. Next week will be an EO12.
Announcement.
Yeah, there's a bunch. So we got a few quick plugs, and we're gonna turn it over to the next program. Uche, do you want to kick off any announcements?
So November 17th, there's going to be a Philosophy Club fundraiser in El Paso Hall and Wichita Hall. We're going to be selling designer T-shirts. Philosophy Club's doing a collab with Gucci and Dolce & Gabbana.
Yes.
We're doing a collab. Come get your T-shirts.
We're also going to discuss how lying is bad.
Nah, lying's lying.
And
It's
how
not lying, it's selling. Okay.
Yeah.
So
DG meets the
Advertising.
RCPC.
and we're going to be selling pizzas, sodas, T-shirts,
type of
and
pizza?
popcorn. Cheese and pepperoni pizzas.
Cool.
Dolce & Gabbana pizzas. And this is going to be happening at El Paso Hall and Wichita Hall, November 17th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Yes.
Also, there's going to be a movie screening of Melancholia. It's a movie about the apocalypse. People are experiencing the apocalypse.
Fantastic
with
movie.
Many different perspectives on how they're taking the end of the world about to come. We're going to be showing that November 28th, 3 to 6 p.m. It's going to be right after a Philosophy Club meeting. It's out on Tuesday. And it's going to be in Wichita 115, I believe.
Yes.
So big things coming up for November and the Philosophy Club.
Big
Very
things.
cool.
I'm gonna parlay that as well. So also, I want to say this: the philosophy program is sponsoring a philosophy student conference. Now I mentioned this last time, but I have some more details here. Essentially, it's going to be from 12:30 to 3:30 on November 8th. So a week from today. In Sabine Hall. So if we have literally a limited amount of spots here, and we want to make sure that everybody who's going to present is fully on board. We do have still some openings that remain. So if you would like to present something, it doesn't have to even be a paper. It could be a poem. It could be a work of art. It could be a movie you made on your MacBook. It could be a scene from a play. Do you have people act out that gets at a philosophical truth? Definitely get at me, gmanzi@dcccd.edu. I think we're gonna have a grand total of I want to say 9 to 12 students. Yes, here it is.
Is there a topic we'll be mainly focusing on?
No, it's anything that you'd like to discuss that's philosophical. So yeah, there's that. I wanted to plug that. And also, next Tuesday, the Philosophy Club will be participating in Fresh Check Day, as we've been plugging already. So look for us. The Philosophy Club will be sponsoring the Stop and Chill booth, where you can come by and just chill out and decompress.
Relax.
Professor Manzi
And
doesn't
decompose.
know how apparently kids these days relax, so he's like asking for us for ideas. Like, how do you relax? You know how to relax.
I don't know how anybody relaxes. All right, you're listening to KDUX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College in Dallas, Texas. We're the voice of Richland College. Views expressed on this show are our own unless otherwise stated and do not reflect the opinion of KDUX Web Radio, Richland College, or the DCCCD. Stay tuned next for Rock Shop, and thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back next Wednesday. Tuesday
Adios.
with a new topic. Thank you to my guests.
Peace.
And
Peace.
think about it.